A new religious liberty bill has been filed in the state Senate. Supporters say it's limited in scope, but the new bill is likely to stir more controversy. Governor Deal has concerns about using an increased tax on cigarettes to fund transportation. And the state of Georgia and 25 other states are on the winning end of a lawsuit to stop President Obama's executive order on immigration. Lawmakers starts right now. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers. I'm Bill Nygut. It's day 18 of the 2015 legislative session. Time flies when you're having fun. And though most of Georgia's in the deep freeze, there is plenty of heat at the Gold Dome as legislators continue to hammer out the big issues. Pat St. Clair joins us now with the latest from the Capitol. Pat?
Thanks, Bill. You know, 5 feet really isn't a lot, only 60 inches, but it is everything when it comes to deepening the Port of Savannah from 42 feet to 47 feet. Today, the House unanimously approved Senate Bill 5. It's the first bill to make it all the way through the General Assembly this session. It allows the Savannah Harbor Deepening Project to move forward after years of delay. After it passed, we caught up with the sponsor in the House, Representative Ron Stevens.
You know, it's massive. We can't, except for only very high tides, we can't get these post-Panamax ships, they call them, in and out of the port. And it's a very big deal because as the Panama Canal gets retrofitted and allows for these larger ships, we're going to be able to bring these ships into Savannah. And we can't expand, we can't continue to grow without these additional 5 feet.
So as far as an economic impact, what does it mean to the state of Georgia?
Well, there's 320,000 jobs, but it's not just Savannah and the coastal Georgia. There's over 60,000 jobs that are in Fulton County, and we even looked up in the opposite end of the state. There's 1,500 jobs in the Speaker's District, and we looked that up to make sure that there's not a single county where the ports doesn't touch job creation or job sustainability. So it's massive. We're one of the few ports in the country that exports more than we import, which is a pretty big deal. And it's not only the ports. Keep in mind, Georgia is about to become an energy exporter as the liquid natural gas is going to be exported out of the Savannah area. And that's independent of the ports, but it's a very big deal. They're going to put about $1 billion investment into that area.
So it's been a long time coming. So can you explain the progression of this bill? How long has it taken?
It's been well over a decade and a half, and it's been a long progress. There's been a lot of mitigation. There have been everything from fresh water, drinking water. We've got surface water in Savannah. Making sure that was taken care of. And if there's ever a possibility of anybody having any interest in it, I think they were taken care of over this long period of time. And finally put the nail in the coffin in this final step is a big, big deal. And we certainly hope the governor's going to sign it today.
And are you fairly assured that he is going to?
Oh, he's been waiting on it with that hot pen, ready to put his name on it so that we can get this thing underway. The timing of this thing is incredibly important.
You talked briefly about how there are jobs in Fulton County and other counties that are affected by this. Like, what kinds of jobs?
Well, it has everything to do with the chickens that we ship out of Hall County in North Georgia. So there's every single product, and agriculture, of course, including wood, which is, of course, part of the agriculture. But there's and that's just in the Savannah port alone. But this was a game changer, and eventually the ports will build out, and we'll have the opportunity to go on the other side, and then we'll be going after the #1 position, because the #1 port on the eastern seaboard now is the combined port of New York and New Jersey. So once we get Georgia, South Carolina, of course sharing the same river as we always have, then we're going to be able to kick this thing to another gear, and you'll see the Jasper Savannah port, or Savannah Jasper port area, be the #1 port in the country.
A spokesman for the governor's office says as soon as the governor receives the bill, he will sign it. Also receiving final passage today, the supplemental budget bill. The $21 billion spending plan makes adjustments to the current fiscal year. Now that lawmakers have wrapped that up, they can move on to dealing with next year's budget. And then back in the House today, we had the first hearing on a controversial bill that would regulate driver-for-hire companies like Uber, which use social media to link drivers to customers. It's called HB 224, sponsored by Representative Alan Powell and discussed in the House Regulated Industries Committee. He claims Uber has an unfair advantage in paying no sales tax and less insurance. But his biggest concern is background checks.
The public has a reasonable right to know that the person who picks him up, who has control of their credit card, that they're not a certain felon.
Uber spokesman Nick Zabrinsky says they're willing to work with the committee, but he also claims his drivers are safe and the passengers are protected by technology.
Folks are essentially entering into a prearranged contract with somebody that they've been matched with. They have a picture of the person, they have the make, model, and license of their car. They know exactly what vehicle they're supposed to get into. They enter it, they take it to where they want to go. There are a number of safety features that are built into the application that make it much different from, say, just getting into a taxi off the street.
Today's hearing was for informational purposes and no action was taken. That's it for us, Bill. Back to you.
Thanks for your report, Pat. Let's welcome tonight's panel. Joining us, Greg Bluestein, the political writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where he contributes to the Political Insider blog, which is a daily must-read for anyone who wants to keep track of politics and the legislature. Loretta Lepore is a Republican expert and a communications specialist. And Howard Franklin is one of the South's youngest and we hear most successful Democratic strategists. That's a great buildup for you,
I appreciate
Howard.
that.
So, Greg Bluestein, let me turn to you first, if I may. We've already had a religious liberty bill filed early over on the House side. Sam Teasley entered it. It immediately generated the kind of controversy it got when it was in the legislature last year. And now Josh McCoon on the Senate side has dropped his own bill. Why two separate bills? What does McCoon do that Sam Teasley doesn't?
Well, you could say the other shoe has dropped now that the Senator McCoon's bill has dropped. Representative Teasley's has already been read twice, but it hasn't yet reached a committee vote. We hear that Senator McCoon's is already getting a hearing scheduled soon and might even get a vote scheduled.
So it's on a faster track.
It seems like it's a faster track. It also, very importantly, already has 28 co-sponsors, which means it already has the votes needed to pass the Senate if it actually reaches a floor vote there.
So can you speculate as to why it would be moving more quickly on the Senate side than on the House side?
I think that he's built up a basis of support in the Senate. That's why he's waited so long. It's almost midpoint into the session, and we haven't seen the bill yet. I think he was building support so he could get to this point.
Loretta, the fact of the matter is that another religious liberty bill is simply going to fan the flames of controversy among those people who oppose this completely. Do you see that this bill may have a tough time passing in the House because there is so much opposition that's built up over there?
I do, and some of that is because the Speaker's been on the record as saying he doesn't identify or see a need for this type of legislation, and so that's part of the reason I think why Sam Teasley's bill has not been yet assigned to a committee. And on the Senate side, adding to what Greg said, oftentimes this happens with a lot of legislation where you're trying to get something passed, especially late in the session, and in terms of getting things passed by day 30, it is late in the session to introduce a new bill, but it's also the leadership. Where's the leadership on this bill? And I think in the Senate, there is more favorability toward helping to move this bill along. So at least it gets to the Senate floor.
So if it gets to the Senate floor and passes and gets passed over to the House, is it there likely that the House is going to reject it because the Speaker's not thrilled with it, or could it go through despite whatever opposition he feels?
Anything could happen.
Okay,
right?
fair enough. That's exactly the right answer at this point.
It has to get assigned to a committee in the House, and
right.
if the House bill is not assigned to a committee, then it's not a good sign for a Senate bill to get assigned to a committee.
That's right. Howard, Senator McCoon said in putting his bill in the hopper that this bill does nothing more than essentially reinforce existing federal law on the subject of protecting religious rights, particularly in the government sector. So what's controversial about that? If Bill Clinton, as president, passed a introduced similar legislation?
I can't describe his interpretation of the bill. Obviously, he drafted it, but if the Speaker has already said, I don't see a need for it, I think that is a pretty sure sign that maybe there's a bit of disagreement there. What I would say, looking back over the last couple sessions, I mean, we started with Show Me Your Papers. We had last year with
guns everywhere. Now we're with religious liberty. It seems like Republicans and leadership in particular need to figure out whether or not they want to roll out a welcome mat for people who are going to visit, or they're going to shoot off a warning shot. Well, and I think leadership, and I have to applaud the speaker here, have decided that this is not something that we need to do.
Well, in part because the business community has made it clear that for the most part, they don't want this legislation at all. They think it sends a bad signal to the rest of the country about Georgia, yes?
I think absolutely. And I think when you got a place that's the birthplace of the civil rights movement, the only state with 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners, a number of other things that have been happening here on the civil rights front, I think it absolutely, whether or not the language is codified the way that the senator says it is, I think you have to say it's symbolically it's not a good piece of legislation.
Am I correct that Josh McCoon's bill has language that is not in the Teasley bill, which speaks of religious institutions that would protect, for instance, the Muslim community in trying to build that mosque that they wanted to get a permit for up in Kennesaw? Is that correct?
Yeah, there's that provision in it as well. And remember, the midpoint of the session is next week. And so a lot of the gamesmanship ratchets it up. And even though House Speaker David Ralston has said he's not a fan of this legislation, Governor Deal has said he is receptive to it and that he passed similar legislation while in the House, U.S. House up in Congress. So this could be used as a bargaining chip down the road, maybe to get religious conservatives to vote for his transportation bill or other priorities of his.
I'll give this as a toss-up because I don't know what the answer is. I have asked this, I guess, kind of naive question several times now. We have 2 diametrically opposed views on what these bills do. We have McCoon and Teasley insisting that these bills are not directed at the gay and lesbian community. And of course, we have a lot of community leaders, including the religious community, out there saying, yes, these bills do offer an opportunity for businesses and government to discriminate against gays and lesbians. How do we get to the bottom of that? Or is that just, how do we figure out what that's all about?
Well, I don't know that we will. I think it's going to be, to Greg's point, a lot of one-on-one conversations with the sponsors and the advocates of the bill to try to convince people, others, to vote for it on its merit. I mean, if you look at the bill, Senator McCoon's bill is less than 3 pages, less than 3 full pages. And the language in the bill is very vague. And I think that's what unnerves people, is the vagueness of the language, that it leaves a lot of room. It doesn't say in there that it's discriminatory in any way, and it tries to remove any evidence of discrimination, and the land use provision is in there, but there's still a lot of room for interpretation. And until the sponsors of the bills can come forward and say why this is actually needed, how are the rights, how is government truly infringing upon religious liberty?
I appreciate that, because it really does feel as if the difficult issue here is going to be, we won't know until this bill is enacted into law how people are going to use it.
I think that's exactly the case, and I think it's also a scary parallel to the immigration bill we passed several years ago, where we thought about all these things that had to do with law and order for illegal and legal immigrants, and then we found out that we could decimate an entire agriculture industry in the southern part of the state without realizing that the unintended consequence was there waiting for us.
So I speculate that this is one of those bills that we could watch go down to day 40 and could be used in maneuvering between the House and Senate down at the end of the session.
Yeah, this seems like a bargaining chip.
Yeah, it sure does.
Right down to the wire.
Let's turn to another subject. You had a great little item on the Political Insider blog this afternoon. There's been talk that to raise even more money for the transportation package, that $1 billion plus that we need for roads, bridges, infrastructure, we ought to have an increase in the cigarette tax up to $1.60, I think is the figure they're talking about. And you learned something today about where the governor stands on that.
Yeah, and so raising that tax would raise $545 million more that could go to transportation.
It's not chump change.
It's not chump change. It's basically like winning the lottery. And that's a very tempting pot for lawmakers who are trying to raise more than $1 billion in new transportation revenue. So a lot of lobbyists and a lot of advocates have come out saying this is right there waiting for you. The governor, though, said he is not receptive to it. He said he doesn't believe that raising the taxes on tobacco is the right way to go for raising transportation revenue. Partly because it's progressive, but partly because it's an addiction. And he says that these folks, a lot of the folks who are addicted are low income. They're going to be buying it anyway. Some of them will be going across state lines, but most of these guys are buying it anyway in Georgia. And he doesn't believe that the tax should be raised on the backs of these nicotine addicts.
He also, I think, if I read your article correctly, suggested that another problem he sees is it's not a sustainable source of revenue moving forward. The exact same thing he's had to say about the $100 million bond referendum that's been proposed for transit. So is that a fair observation that, you're really depending on people to continue to smoke, to raise money, and if people stop, then you're going to lose that revenue?
I mean, I have no issue at all with any piece of legislation that makes it harder to buy cancer-causing, death, causing, cigarettes. But I will say, I think most of the conversation I've heard around HB 170 has focused on looking for ways to connect the actual users of roads and bridges to the funding sources. So we've talked about, fees on rental cars. We've talked about, assessing a fee for electric vehicles, which don't pay into the gas tax. And I think most of the conversation will continue to center around those places.
Loretta, what this does say is that they really are continuing to struggle to figure out exactly how to raise, not just in 1 year, but in multiple years, the $1 billion that they're going to need to make our transportation system work correctly, yes?
Right, and I think that's why you saw the move to the excise tax, because it's more predictable. It's not going to fluctuate if you're looking at a tax per gallon rather than a percentage tax on the overall sale. And as gas prices go down, that's less revenue generated. So, that was really part of the reason to the conversion to the excise tax. And I don't think that anybody that's involved in the discussion on transportation, I think everybody agrees that that's a good move.
Yeah.
It's just, what should that excise tax be? Right now it stands at 29.2% at the state level. There's been revisions to the bill again. And so those revisions would remove it at the local level, that obligation at the local level, but it still remains at the state. So we will begin to see the introduction of more stability into the funding stream and sustainability for transportation.
Yeah, and we saw that yesterday with the Transportation Committee meeting, tinkering with the bill, making some minor tweaks, but Representative Roberts, the head of that committee, didn't propose major changes in the funding stream.
Yeah, there was no proposal to raise the excise tax, and that sort of gets to the rub of it too. Is that a lot of these local governments that would face declines in revenue are saying the state should shoulder a burden of it as well. And the rub of this all also is that, as we were talking about regressive taxes on cigarettes, well, the gas tax in the long range is progressive too, as cars get to be more efficient and more people buy electric vehicles that don't use any gas.
Right. Okay, look, we have to take a break. This conversation is going to go on for the rest of the session, because coming up with $1 billion in revenue is not going to be an easy task. So obviously we'll stay on top of it. Up next, though, on Lawmakers, President Obama was roundly criticized by conservatives for his executive action on immigration. Now a federal judge agrees with states, including Georgia, who have opposed that plan. What's next? We'll take that up when we continue. By unanimous vote on February 19, 1953, the Georgia General Assembly established the Georgia Literature Commission. Governor Herman Talmadge signed it into law. But this was not a panel to promote works of literature. It was the nation's first censorship board and was tasked with investigating literature deemed, quote, detrimental to the morals of the citizens of the state. The commission lasted about 20 years. Welcome back to Lawmakers. Joining us tonight for our conversation, Greg Bluestein, political writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Loretta Lepore, a Republican strategist, and Democratic strategist, Howard Franklin. Before we turn to this next issue, we need to give you a pat on the back and not forget to do it. You received the AJC did, and the political team, a really lovely honor recognition the other day. Tell us about it.
Yeah, our data gurus have put together this thing called the Legislative Navigator that not only does it outline what each bill does, but it also outlines predictability. It predicts the percentage by which it would pass. So it basically says this is a bill that has a 56% chance of passing or getting shot down. It's really fascinating.
How do people get to it?
They go to myajc.com.
Okay, it really, congratulations on that. It's a really...
Our data folks are amazing.
Yeah, it's a great tool. Okay, so that taken care of. Let's talk a little bit about this court ruling the other day in Texas. The setup, I think we all know. President Obama has gotten a lot of pushback for issuing an executive order in which he would protect up to several million undocumented residents who are living here, prevent them from being deported for at least, I guess, 3 years is the initial time frame. A number of states sued, saying this was outside of his authority. This is a congressional action. One of those states was Georgia. Sam Olin's joined that suit. Federal judge in Texas, he has not ruled against the Obama administration yet, but he has stayed the beginning of that plan, which was supposed to, I think, start today or tomorrow, yes?
Right. So there's like two issues here at hand. So there's the constitutional issue. Did the president supersede his authority by issuing this executive order? And then there's the issue of this lawsuit around states' rights. And so what the attorneys general that have filed this suit say is that the federal government, and by the president's order, are essentially requiring an unfunded mandate on states. So now states are going to have to pay for the assimilation of the 5 million undocumented workers and all the cost that goes with that. And you can look at the social services or education or driver's license, whatever it may be. And states are saying, we don't have the resources to pay for all of that goes with this executive order. So the judge said, we're going to stay the implementation of the order so the states don't bear that financial burden until the constitutional issue is determined, which is still in flux.
I mean, I think Loretta's got this exactly right. This is exactly how I would have described it. I don't see this as a setback for the president's use of executive power so much, but I do think as an unfunded mandate, there's a lot of planning and a lot of financial resources that need to go into this. And, you know, a lot of these states have different burdens to bear as it relates to assimilating these groups. And I do think it's reasonable and responsible to say, let's figure out what this will cost and what it would look like, and make sure that the process looks like it's consistent across these states before doing so.
So, Greg, let me again make sure that we're all on the same page. Again, so far there's a stay to prevent the executive order from taking effect. But the judge will eventually rule on the what he sees as the legality of this law, right? And then it goes to the Fifth Circuit Court, I think, in New Orleans, where an awful lot of people expect that judge to be overturned.
Yeah, and in the meantime, these 5 million or so undocumented immigrants are in legal limbo. You know, they were supposed to begin filing paperwork right now to get some of their, temporary immigration status changed, and now it's all up in the air. So,
Loretta, let me ask you, because you work with Republican candidates, you work to get across a Republican agenda. Georgia's on board with this lawsuit. That's not unexpected. We would imagine that the governor and the attorney general would want to join this lawsuit. But let's talk about it from a political point of view for a few minutes. As the demographics shift in this state, how wise is it for Republican leaders to associate themselves with this lawsuit, which in the long run is going to really hurt a lot of undocumented? I'm not saying it shouldn't, but I'm saying it is going to make them a little bit more angry about what's going on, yes?
Well, I think there's a couple of points to that. That's kind of a loaded question, candidly. So I think for Republicans, there is very little gray, zero. This is an issue that, makes blood boil. That there's no equivocation that the president has overstepped his authority on this issue.
But is it going to be interpreted by Hispanic voters as an anti-Hispanic effort on the part of the Republicans? That's what I'm really asking.
I think that depends on how Republicans handle it.
Okay.
Now, clearly, I think Republicans could have avoided this entire issue had they picked up and addressed immigration reform when the Senate sent over the bill to the House and Congress, but there was not an aptitude to do that at the time because of partisan politics. So I think where you see, and even the AJC, they had a poll about a month ago, where most voters, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, do want reasonable, sensible immigration reform. And I think so long as Republicans in Washington address that issue and address it in a compassionate manner, where you are thinking about the families and the children and the young people that have only known this country as their own, then I think they'll be okay. But I think if they continue to delay addressing the issue, it will be a problem for them.
Well,
in
and
2016.
thank you for saying that, because that was really what I was asking about. In the long run, Republicans do have to show they care about dealing with a population that is in need right now.
I mean, again, I think Loretta's right about the need to show that they care, but I think there's already a strong narrative about delaying action on important issues. You know, you've got now, after the November elections, some of the largest majorities for the Republicans in the House and the Senate in decades. And so, that, you know, I think the president has rightfully said, I took this issue up because Congress has refused to do so.
Well, yeah, but the question is whether he had the authority to take it up as he did, and that's what the courts will decide.
That's what the question for folks like us who debate this on television. But I think the question for millions of Hispanics in this country will be, you know, one party said, well, I want to address this and figure out how to keep folks who want to abide by the rules, who want to go to school, who want to contribute to the economy inside of America, and the other has just thrown up their hands and not done anything.
All right. This is a debate that will go on and on and on. It's going to be fascinating to see how this moves through the courts in the weeks and months ahead. We are virtually out of time for this portion of the show, but before we get out of here tonight, I want to thank Loretta and Howard and Greg for being with me. Before we leave tonight, you know, we like to track the people of interest down at the Capitol, the people who keep things moving as the lawmakers are doing their work. Tonight we want to introduce you to Steve Stansel of the Georgia Building Authority. His latest project is Liberty Plaza, which replaced a run-down parking deck.
Instead of spending $12 million to fix it, we tore it down. We had sold some surplus properties, and we used that money to come in and make green space. We had probably had the smallest green space of any state capitol in the nation. So there had been plans off and on since 1910 to build an area around a plaza area around the Capitol. So we were able to get the governor and our board to approve it, to build it, and we're just real proud of it right now. If you go through and take your time and look at it, you'll see that we spent a lot of time making sure that it's a teaching tool. We have a place for school buses to be able to pull over and unload their children. Then they can come up and show the kids the 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence from Georgia. We have a flag from each of the 13 original colonies, and on it tells what year they ratified the Constitution. As you go in, it has the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. On the other side, the preamble to the Constitution. You go in and you can see the state seal, both sides of it. A lot of folks are familiar with the front of the seal, but not many people know that that's two-sided. And so on the other side of the plaza, there's you can see what the back side of the state seal looks like.
Steve Stansel of the Georgia Building Authority. So, day 19 of the 2015 legislative session's a wrap. Lawmakers will be back on Monday with special attention to this year's budget process. We'll have Senator Jack Hill and Representative Terry England, who head their budget committees in the House and the Senate. They'll talk about their priorities for this year. In the meantime, stay in touch with us on social media or email us at lawmakers@gpb.org. We'd love to get your questions or comments. Thanks for joining us.
This is a GPB original production.